You want to bring that bad luck back in here. That wheezing is ruining the vibe for Jessica's live stream. My father stood in the doorway, his massive frame blocking the heat, the light, and the mercy that should have come naturally to a grandfather looking at his own granddaughter. He was looking down at my 5-year-old daughter, Zoe, who was gasping for air in the freezing snow, her small chest heaving with a terrifying, whistle-thin sound that cut through the howling wind like a razor. "We are flushing this mistake down the toilet," he said, staring at us with a curl of his lip that displayed pure, unadulterated disgust. "Get out before I call animal control." He didn't wait for a response. He didn't wait for me to beg. He just slammed the heavy oak door in my face, the sound of the deadbolt sliding home echoing like a gunshot in the silent, snowy night. I stood there for a second, stunned, the vibration of the slam still rattling my teeth. I wasn't asking for money. I wasn't asking for a handout. I was begging for the nebulizer sitting on the kitchen counter of the house I paid for, the only machine that could stop my child from turning blue in my arms. It was 11 o'clock at night, and the temperature had dropped to 10 below zero. The wind outside was screaming like something alive, rattling the windows of the cars buried under drifts, but I was on the wrong side of the door. I pounded on the wood until my knuckles cracked and bled, the skin splitting against the unyielding paint. "Dad, please, she can't breathe, just the machine, just let us in for 5 minutes," I screamed, but the house remained a fortress of silence. Zoe was wrapped in a thin coat, shivering violently against my chest, her wheezing growing tighter, more desperate with every second that passed. I wasn't asking for an apology for a lifetime of neglect. I wasn't asking for love. I was begging for shelter for one single night, for the basic human decency of not letting a child freeze to death on a porch. Suddenly, the door cracked open just an inch. A slice of warm, yellow light spilled out onto the snow, illuminating Zoe's pale, terrified face. My father, Arthur, stood in the gap, his silhouette imposing and dark. He did not look concerned. He did not look like a man who had almost just lost a granddaughter. He looked annoyed. He looked at my wheezing child like she was a stain on his evening, a piece of trash that had blown onto his pristine property. I stared at him, searching his eyes for a trace of the father I thought I had, for a flicker of humanity, but I saw only a predator protecting his territory, protecting his resources from what he deemed a parasite. The lock clicked again, that sharp metallic sound louder than the storm surrounding us. I stopped pounding. The fight drained out of me, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. I covered Zoe's ears, turned my back on the warmth, and walked her into the freezing dark. They were not family. They were monsters, and I was done feeding them. We survived that night in a roadside motel that smelled like stale smoke and desperation, the kind of place where people go to disappear. I used an emergency credit card I had sworn never to touch, the plastic feeling heavy and shameful in my hand as I slid it across the scratched counter. Zoe fell asleep instantly on the lumpy mattress, her small chest still hitching with the ghost of the asthma attack, her breathing finally eased by a rental machine I had to drive 30 minutes to find. I sat in a plastic chair by the window, watching the snow bury my car, and I let the memories come. I let myself look at the ledger of my life that my parents had written for me, a book full of red ink and deficits. They called it The Bad Omen. It was their favorite story, their origin myth for why I was less than human. I was born on the exact day my father lost $50,000 in a bad investment. It was a coincidence, a statistical anomaly, but in their superstitious, narcissistic math, it was causation. I was the debt. Then, 3 years later, Jessica was born on the day he won a $5,000 scratch-off lottery ticket. Just like that, the universe had spoken. I was the darkness, and she was the light. I went back to the day I turned 16, the day the ledger truly snapped shut. I was lying in a hospital bed, my left leg shattered in 3 places from a car accident that was not my fault. I was in agony, doped up on morphine, waiting for my mother to hold my hand, to tell me I was going to be okay. Instead, Linda stood at the foot of the bed, looking at my full-leg cast like it was a personal insult, a mess she would have to clean up. She let out a long, heavy sigh that sucked the air out of the room, her eyes fixed on the ceiling rather than her injured daughter. "Of course you broke it," she said, her voice flat and devoid of sympathy. "You break everything, Natalie. You just cost us our retirement." That sentence became the cage I lived in for 13 years. It was the bars that kept me trapped, the whip that drove me forward. They told me the insurance company had denied the claim. They told me the other driver had been uninsured and that they had to take out massive loans, second mortgages, and high-interest debt to save my leg. They told me I owed them my life, and I believed them. I was a child, and they were the adults who held the truth. I let that guilt drive me. I let it carve out my soul. I skipped my senior prom to work double shifts at a greasy diner, smelling like fry oil and exhaustion while my friends danced. I went to a state college on a scholarship and lived on instant noodles and tap water so I could send them checks. For 13 years, I sent them $2,000 every single month. I thought I was paying off a debt of love. I thought I was buying my way back into their hearts, trying to purchase their affection with the sweat of my brow while I was eating expired bread to make rent. Meanwhile, Jessica was driving a Mercedes they leased for her, a car she crashed twice without consequence. She launched 3 different fashion startups that failed within months, all funded by mom and dad's savings, all swept under the rug as learning experiences. When I asked how they could afford it, how they could pay for her failures while I was drowning in debt for my survival, they told me Jessica was the good luck charm. They told me that investing in her would pay off for all of us, that she was the golden goose and I was just the laborer. I looked at my sleeping daughter in that motel room, her chest rising and falling rhythmically, safe for the moment. I realized then that the debt was never real. I had been paying a mortgage on a house I was not allowed to enter. I had been funding the lifestyle of the sister who watched me get kicked out into a blizzard without blinking an eye. The guilt that had crushed me for a decade was not a burden I was born with. It was a weapon they had built to keep me compliant, a lie constructed to exploit me. But it wasn't just the cold that woke me up in that motel room as the sun began to bleed through the thin curtains. It was the memory of the theft. You see, the eviction wasn't just about space or bad luck. It was about liquid cash. It was about the $4,000 I had saved in cash, hidden inside an old coffee tin tucked in the back of my closet. It took me 2 years to save that money, skimming $20 here and $50 there from my grocery budget, skipping meals so my daughter could have extra. It was for Zoe. Her legs were starting to turn inward, a structural issue she inherited from my own untreated injuries, and she needed a specialist who did not take our insurance. That money was her future. It was her ability to walk without pain. Just before he shoved us out the door, my father had raided my room. He claimed he was looking for stolen property, but he went straight for the closet, bypassing everything else. He found the tin. He popped the lid and counted the bills right in front of me, his fingers licking the corners of the cash I had starved myself to save. "Consider this back rent," he said, stuffing the wad into his pocket with a sneer. "I pay the mortgage," I choked out, my voice trembling with rage. "I pay the electric, that is for Zoe's doctor." He didn't even blink. He just told me I should have thought about that before I brought bad energy into his house. But that was not the part that killed the last shred of love I had for him. That happened 2 minutes later. I was frantically stuffing Zoe's clothes into a garbage bag, my hands shaking so hard I couldn't close the ties. I heard them in the hallway. I heard Jessica crying. It was that soft, practiced whimper she used when she broke a nail or wanted a new phone. She was complaining about her aura being damaged by her recent breakup, a tantrum over nothing while my life was falling apart. Then I heard my father's voice. It was soft, gentle, the kind of voice he never used with me. "Here, princess," he said. "Take this, $4,000. It is enough for that healing retreat in Bali you wanted. Go find yourself. You deserve peace." Jessica sniffled, the sound dramatically shifting from distress to calculation. To her credit, she hesitated for a split second. "But what about Natalie? Isn't she broke?" And then Arthur said the sentence that rewired my brain forever, the words that would eventually seal his fate. "Don't worry about your sister," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "She is used to struggling. It is her natural state." I sat in the motel chair, staring at the wall, replaying those words over and over again. Used to struggling. He didn't see my resilience as a virtue. He didn't see my strength as something to be admired. He saw it as a permission slip to abuse me. He believed I was designed to suffer so that Jessica could soar. He had stolen the money for my daughter's legs to pay for my sister's tan. I looked at Zoe sleeping on the bed, her small face relaxed in sleep. She trusted me to protect her. And I had failed because I was too busy trying to please people who saw me as livestock. I stood up. I walked to the wobbly desk in the corner and opened my laptop. The daughter who begged for crumbs was dead. She died in the snow last night. The woman who opened the computer was a senior compliance officer. I hunt fraud for a living. I track down missing assets for billion-dollar corporations, finding money that people think they've hidden forever. And for the first time in my life, I was going to audit my own family. People think audits are boring. They think it is just staring at spreadsheets and drinking stale coffee in a cubicle. But I know the truth. An audit is an autopsy. You strip away the skin of lies and excuses until you find the bone, the hard, unchangeable truth underneath. And I am very good at finding the bone. I didn't hack into my parents' bank accounts. That is illegal, and I am a professional. I simply used the bureaucracy they did not understand. I went to the public library the next morning, while Zoe was still sleeping, and printed out a standard request for records form. I formally requested my own archival medical and insurance history from the National Claims Database. I had the legal right to see every settlement, every payout, and every denial attached to my Social Security number. I filled out the paperwork with a steady hand, notarized it at the bank, mailed it, and then I waited. The next 3 weeks were a blur of survival. I found a cheap, drafty apartment on the edge of town, the heat rattling ominously in the walls. I enrolled Zoe in a new school, using a fake address to get her into a decent district. I worked my job during the day, smiling at colleagues, pretending I was not homeless, pretending my heart was not calcified ash inside my chest. Every evening, I checked the mail, my heart pounding a rhythm of anxiety against my ribs. On a Tuesday, the envelope arrived. It was thick, white, and heavy. I sat at my second-hand kitchen table, the unopened mail in front of me, my pulse thumping in my ears so loud I could barely hear the traffic outside. I sliced it open with a kitchen knife. I pulled out the settlement disbursement record dated November 2010. My eyes scanned past the medical codes, past the descriptions of permanent tibial shatter and reduced mobility, past the doctor's notes I had never been allowed to see. I stopped at the bottom line. Total settlement amount, $120,450. Status, paid in full. The air left the room. They had not been denied. They had not fought for me. They had cashed out. I flipped the page. There was a photocopy of the check. It was made out to Arthur and Linda Miller, guardians of minor. On the back, my father's signature was scrolled in blue ink, bold and arrogant, next to a stamp from the bank. But I was not done. A settlement proves they had money, but it doesn't prove theft. They could argue they spent it on my medical bills, on rehab, on special shoes. They could lie and say they used it for my care. I needed to prove where the money went. I needed the kill shot. I opened my laptop and logged into the county clerk's public records portal. Property deeds and mortgage liens are public information if you know where to look. I pulled up the history of my parents' house, the house I was locked out of, the house I had helped pay for 13 years. I found the entry for December 2010, 3 days after the insurance check was cashed. Transaction type, mortgage satisfaction. Principal payoff amount, $120,450. I stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. It was not an approximation. It was not about the same amount. It was a penny-perfect match, down to the cent. I did not feel sad anymore. I felt a cold, hard clarity settling over me like armor. They did not go into debt to save my leg. They used my broken body to buy their freedom. Every time my leg ached in the rain, every time I limped after a long shift at work, I was paying for their roof. I had bought that house with my pain, and they had kicked me out of it. I printed the documents. I put them in a crisp manila folder. I wasn't the ungrateful daughter anymore. I wasn't the bad omen. I was the landlord, and it was time to collect the rent. I did not call my parents immediately. I couldn't. If I did, I would scream, and screaming gives them power. I needed a witness. I needed someone whose authority they could not dismiss or gaslight. I went to Dr. Alina Vance. She was the director of the Compliance Institute where I worked, a woman who terrified most of the staff with her intellect and her refusal to suffer fools, but who had always respected my work. I laid the folder on her desk. I didn't cry. I didn't ask for pity. I just walked her through the timeline. The accident, the settlement, the theft, the mortgage payoff, the lies about the debt. She looked at the documents for a long time, her eyes scanning the paper, her mind processing the data. When she finally looked up, her expression was pure steel. "This is constructive trust fraud, Natalie," she said quietly. "In this state, if a guardian uses a minor's funds to purchase property, that property belongs to the minor. The house is yours." I know, I said. I want it back, but I need them to admit it. I need a confession that ties the money to the house, or this will be tied up in court for years. Dr. Vance leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. What do you need from me? A venue, I said, and an authority figure. 3 days later, we sprang the trap. It was clean, simple, and powered by my parents' greatest weakness, their greed. I called them, sounding small, broken, and desperate. I told them I'd hit rock bottom, that Zoe's condition was worsening, and I was applying for a $300,000 victim's assistance grant to cover her extensive surgery and our living expenses. There's a catch, I whispered into the phone, injecting a tremble into my voice. The committee needs proof that my original guardians were financially responsible. They need to see that the money won't be wasted on someone who can't manage it. They need a history of fiscal stewardship. My father's interest sharpened immediately. I could hear him sitting up straighter. Why would we do that for you? He asked, suspicious but intrigued. Because if it's approved, I said, lowering my voice to a conspiratorial whisper, there's a retroactive fiduciary stewardship bonus. $50,000 paid directly to the guardians who managed the original estate. It's a reward for good parenting. I heard him cover the phone receiver. I heard him whisper to my mother, the excitement palpable even through the muffling. The bait did everything. It offered cash, zero work, and ego validation. It appealed to their vanity and their greed. Fine, Arthur said, forcing a magnanimous tone, the kind he used when he wanted to sound like a benevolent king. We will do this one last time for you. You have to meet me at the institute, I said quickly. The director needs to witness the signatures in person. It's a federal form. They agreed instantly. They didn't ask about Zoe. They didn't ask where I was living. They didn't ask how we were surviving. They only asked what time to show up for the check. They arrived right on time, dressed in their Sunday best. My father was in a two-tone suit that he hadn't worn in years, my mother in her church pearls, clutching a cheap leather purse. Jessica was beside them, scanning the lobby like she was pricing the furniture, looking bored and entitled. Dr. Vance met us in a glass-walled conference room, all crisp bureaucracy and steel furniture. Please have a seat, she said, her voice clipped and professional. We need to verify custodial history before we can release the fiduciary bonus. A heavy stock check lay face down on the table in front of my father. He couldn't stop staring at it, his eyes darting to it like a snake to a mouse. He smiled toward the corner camera, thinking he was auditioning for a role. We're happy to help, Arthur said, his voice booming. We always put our children first. We sacrificed everything for them. I stayed silent and watched them perform. I sat in the chair opposite them, my hands folded in my lap, calm as a stone. Did you receive the insurance settlement funds in 2010? Dr. Vance asked, her pen poised over a legal pad. And can you swear under penalty of perjury that those funds were used to secure the household stability for the minor? Arthur puffed up his chest, proud of his lie. Absolutely. We managed every penny. We didn't waste it. We put it into the house so Natalie always had a roof over her head. We sacrificed our own retirement to keep that home safe for her. Cold adrenaline slid down my spine. He'd said it. He'd said it on camera, under oath, in front of a witness. Excellent, Dr. Vance said, her face unreadable. Then sign this affidavit of asset tracing confirming the use of the funds so we can release the bonus. She slid the document across the table. It was thick, dense with legal text. Arthur didn't read it. He didn't read the constructive trust language, the definitions of misappropriation, the fine print that would ruin him. He only saw the words fiduciary bonus and $50,000. He signed with a flourish, a wide, looping signature, and passed it to Linda. She signed too, smiling at me like I owed them gratitude, like she was doing me a favor. Done, Arthur said, tapping the paper. Now where's that check? I stood up slowly. I lifted the affidavit, checked the signatures, and met my father's eyes. Thank you, I said evenly, my voice void of emotion. You just admitted under oath and on camera that you used my disability settlement to pay off your mortgage. Arthur frowned, the smile faltering slightly. What? Dr. Vance removed her glasses and all warmth vanished from the room. Actually, Mr. Miller, she said, her voice like ice. In this state, property purchased with misappropriated funds from a minor is subject to a constructive trust. Since you just admitted, under penalty of perjury, that the house was bought entirely with Natalie's money, the house doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the victim. She let the silence hang in the room, heavy and suffocating. It belongs to Natalie. Arthur's smile cracked, then shattered completely. What? The door to the conference room opened. A uniformed sheriff's deputy stepped in, his hand resting calmly on his belt. There were no handcuffs, just paperwork. Mr. and Mrs. Miller, he said, I'm serving you with a temporary restraining order on asset disposal and a notice to quit for trespassing. Trespassing? Linda shrieked, her face turning a mottled red. It's my house. Not anymore, I said. My voice steady. I said you're squatters in my property. I'm evicting you. You have 24 hours to vacate. My father went gray, the color draining from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. He looked from the documents to me to the deputy as the truth finally landed. The trap was never the bonus. It was the signature. It was his own arrogance. Jessica rose from her chair, her eyes wide with shock then rage. It was a pure, sharp rage, but not because they stole from me. She was furious because they got caught and because it affected her. You idiots, she hissed at them. You lost the house. How could you be so stupid? Get out, Dr. Vance said, pointing to the door. Now. The walk to the lobby was the longest trip of my father's life. There were no cuffs, which was somehow worse. It was a walk of total, irreversible defeat. The sheriff followed behind them like gravity, inescapable and heavy. At the glass doors to the street, Arthur spun back, panic replacing his arrogance. His eyes were wild, desperate. Natalie, he pleaded, his voice cracking. You can't do this. I'm your father. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I felt nothing. No love, no hate, just the emptiness where a relationship should have been. No, I said. You're a tenant who didn't pay rent, and your lease is up. I turned to leave, but the final blow wasn't mine. It was Jessica's. Arthur reached for his golden child, his last hope. Jess, honey, he said, his voice trembling. Bring the car around. We'll stay with you until this blows over. It's just a misunderstanding. Jessica didn't move. She was staring at her phone, scrolling through a digital copy of the lawsuit the sheriff had just emailed her. She was listed as a named interested party, her assets potentially frozen as well. She looked up, her face set in pure, cold self-preservation. You committed fraud, she snapped, her voice dripping with disdain. You signed a confession, Dad. Are you crazy? We did this for you, Linda screamed. I didn't ask you to get caught, Jessica shot back. She looked at them with total disgust. My Uber is 5 minutes away. You're on your own. And she walked out without looking back, leaving them stranded on the sidewalk with nothing but their Sunday clothes and a court summons in their hands. I sold the house. I didn't even step inside to pack. I didn't want anything from those walls. I hired a crew to clear it out and listed it the day the eviction was finalized. It sold in a week, the market hungry for the property. I took every cent of the equity my broken leg had paid for and started over. I paid for Zoe's surgery. Then I bought a clean, bright condo across the city with a security system no one else can touch. My parents live in a one-bedroom rental near the highway. Their credit is wrecked. Their golden child, Jessica, refuses to speak to them, terrified that their stain will ruin her brand. They still call me from blocked numbers, screaming or crying, but I never answer. I don't need to. Last night, it snowed again. I sat watching the flakes drift past the glass while Zoe slept in the next room, breathing easy, safe, and warm. I walked to the front door and turned the deadbolt. Click. It was the most beautiful sound in the world. Have you ever sacrificed everything for people who wouldn't even open a door for you? Tell me your story in the comments. And if you're ready to take control of your own life, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about finding justice when the world is unfair. Until next time, remember, you don't owe anyone your suffering.